The Overlook Motel sat along the desolate stretch of Route 90, its neon sign flickering weakly against the oppressive desert sky. I'd driven past it 100 times, and it had always felt like a place stuck in time. But when I saw the job listing for a night desk clerk, promising decent pay and quiet nights, I thought, why not? My name is Julie, 25, a college dropout trying to piece together a life out of student debt and half-formed dreams. The motel seemed like a temporary answer to a long list of problems. Deserted on most nights, it was the kind of place where people came to disappear. I convinced myself it would be an easy gig. No drama, no expectations, just me, a desk, and a whole lot of nothing. On my first night, the manager handed me an old clipboard, its plastic cracked and clouded with years of grime. "Rules are written on here," he said, his voice flat, his eyes darting around the empty lobby. "Make sure you follow them." He didn't wait for me to respond before leaving, the door slamming shut behind him. The motel was eerily silent, the air heavy with something I couldn't name. The clipboard sat on the desk, its surface scuffed and stained. I flipped through the check-in sheets, noticing faint pencil markings along the margins, words etched in jagged strokes, almost frantic. And that's when I saw them. The rules. Rule 1. If a guest checks in after 10:30 p.m., assign them room 5 and nothing else. Rule 2. Do not look directly at the cameras between 3 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. Rule 3. If the neon sign outside the lobby begins to flicker rapidly, lock the doors immediately and stay inside until sunrise. Rule 4. Never go into room 7, no matter what you hear. Rule 5. If you hear the sound of a child laughing, do not leave the desk. Play the radio and wait for it to stop. The rules made no sense, but I figured it was some kind of joke, a relic from the motel's past, scrawled by a bored employee. But the longer I sat there, the more the silence seemed to press against me. And then, at exactly 11:15 p.m., the bell over the door chimed, and a man walked in. "Need a room," he said, his voice low and gravelly. His eyes flicked toward the clipboard on the desk. "Sure," I said, my hands trembling as I flipped to the guest ledger. My gaze fell to the rules again. If a guest checks in after 10:30 p.m., assign them room 5 and nothing else. "Room 5, I muttered, sliding the key across the counter. The man didn't smile. He didn't even nod. He just took the key and walked out into the darkness. After the man left, the lobby seemed even quieter than before. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. I sat back at the desk, running my fingers over the cracked surface of the clipboard, rereading the rules as if they might suddenly make sense. The air felt heavy, the kind of weight that seemed to gather in the shadows of the room. The hours dragged on, and the hum of the old fluorescent lights above felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I turned on the small radio behind the desk, tuning it to a local station, just to fill the void. The DJ's voice was calm, a soothing drawl, but every now and then the signal would cut out, replaced by static. At around 2:45 a.m., I decided to stretch my legs. The lobby had a large glass window that overlooked the parking lot, and beyond that was just the barren desert, stretching endlessly under the dim glow of the crescent moon. Room 5's light was on, faintly visible through the curtains. I felt a strange sense of relief knowing someone else was nearby, even if they were just a few feet away. The relief didn't last long. As I turned to head back to the desk, I caught a flicker in the corner of my eye. The neon sign outside the motel, its bright green light spelling out Overlook Motel Vacancy, was pulsing erratically. The flicker wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind you'd expect from an old, worn-out sign. It was too fast, too deliberate, like the light was trying to send a signal. Rule 3. If the neon sign outside the lobby begins to flicker rapidly, lock the doors immediately and stay inside until sunrise. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the keys off the desk and bolted to the front door, flipping the locks. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed in the silence. I turned off the lobby lights and crouched behind the desk, clutching the radio like it was some kind of lifeline. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. The flickering outside cast shadows across the lobby, the light creating strange shapes that danced on the walls. At one point, I swear I saw something move in the parking lot, a shadow shifting unnaturally between the cars. My breath caught in my throat, and I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to look again. The flickering stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The room plunged into a strange stillness, the kind that makes your ears strain for sound. Slowly, I peeked over the desk, glancing out the window. The neon sign was steady now, humming softly like it always had. The parking lot was empty, just the rows of cars sitting silently under the moonlight. But something felt off. My heart sank as I noticed something else. The light in room 5 was off. The man had left, I was sure of it. Except he hadn't returned his key. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the man had left without bothering to return the key. A careless traveler more interested in hitting the road than following protocol. But something about the absence of his car in the parking lot gnawed at me. I stared at the clipboard, at the faint indentation of his name, Edward Dawson. It wasn't much to go on, but it was more than I had before. I decided to check room 5. Grabbing the master key from under the counter, I slipped out into the night. The air was colder than I expected, and the wind carried the faint scent of dust and something metallic, like rusted iron. The Overlook Motel had a strange charm during the day, but under the moonlight, it felt like a skeleton of its former self. The old paint was peeling, and the desert sand seemed to creep closer with every passing hour, reclaiming what man had tried to conquer. As I approached room 5, I noticed something strange. The window curtains, which had been drawn earlier, were now wide open. The darkened room seemed to stare back at me like an empty socket, a hollow absence of life. I hesitated, gripping the master key tighter in my hand. The room was immaculately clean, too clean. The bed was made, the corners of the sheets tucked in with military precision. The faint scent of bleach hung in the air, and not a single personal item had been left behind. No luggage, no shoes by the door, not even a used towel in the bathroom. It was as though the man had never been there at all. But the most unsettling detail was the key. It was sitting on the bedside table, perfectly aligned with the edge, gleaming faintly under the dim light of the lamp. My chest tightened. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If a room key is found in any place other than the front desk, do not touch it. Leave immediately and report the incident. I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the key as though it might leap off the table. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the faint hum of the motel's old air conditioning unit. Just as I reached the door, something caught my attention, a faint smudge on the mirror above the dresser. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, my breath fogging up the glass as I leaned in. It wasn't a smudge. It was writing, etched faintly into the surface, almost imperceptible. "You shouldn't be here." The words sent a jolt of panic through me, and I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the lamp. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. The desert wind whipped at my face as I made my way back to the lobby, the shadows from the neon sign dancing across the walls as I locked the door behind me. I sat down at the desk, my hands trembling. Edward Dawson was gone, but the room didn't feel empty. It felt like something had taken his place. The rest of the night was uneventful, or at least, that's what I told myself. I sat behind the desk, staring at the cracked clipboard as if it might suddenly reveal its secrets. Every so often, I glanced at the security monitors, the black and white screens flickering faintly as they captured empty hallways and an even emptier parking lot. Room 5's feed, however, refused to load, cycling between static and blackness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I checked the doors again, made sure they were locked, and even double-checked the no vacancy sign. But the nagging unease didn't go away. I wanted to call someone, anyone, just to hear another voice. But who would I call at this hour? And what would I even say? "Hey, I think my motel might be haunted," wasn't exactly going to fly. At 3:13 a.m., I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They started faintly, like soft taps against the old wooden floors, and grew louder as they approached the lobby. I froze, my heart racing. I looked at the monitors, but none of the cameras showed anyone in the hallways or the parking lot. The footsteps, however, were steady and deliberate, echoing as if someone or something was pacing. Grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a flashlight with weak batteries, I stood and pointed it toward the hall. The beam was feeble, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to ripple against the walls. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. I swallowed hard, trying to summon whatever courage I had left. "If you're a guest, the lobby is this way. We're closed for the night." The words felt ridiculous even as I said them. No one replied. Then, a faint whisper broke the silence. It wasn't clear at first, just a low murmur that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I swung the flashlight around, illuminating the faded wallpaper and the peeling paint. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The whisper grew louder, layering on itself until it sounded like multiple voices speaking at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate. The sound was coming from behind the wall of old guest check-in ledgers, the same ledgers where the grease-stained rules had been written. With trembling hands, I pulled one of the ledgers off the shelf. As I did, the whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I opened the book, flipping through its yellowed pages. Guest names were scrawled in faded ink, the dates stretching back decades. Then, I saw it. Edward Dawson, room 5. My stomach twisted. I flipped back a few more pages, scanning the names and dates. They all ended the same way, with a smudge of grease over the final entry, as though someone had tried and failed to erase them. That's when the whispers returned, louder this time. "Leave." The word was unmistakable, clear as day, cutting through the static-like hum of overlapping voices. I dropped the ledger, stumbling back as it hit the desk with a thud. The footsteps started again, but this time they were running, toward the lobby. The sound of footsteps stopped just outside the lobby door. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. The heavy silence that followed made every second unbearable. I stared at the door, its frosted glass warped by faint moonlight, straining my ears for any indication of who was there. And then came a faint whisper. "Don't look." The words were so soft, so fragile, that I might have imagined them. My breath hitched, and my eyes darted to the old, cracked clipboard sitting on the counter where I'd left it earlier. The strange, faint pencil markings on the guest check-in sheets had been haunting me since I discovered them. I thought they were warnings, or maybe they were threats. Either way, they were becoming my only guide through whatever hellish game I was playing. I leaned over the counter, flashlight in hand, and scanned the desk for the clipboard. There it was, lying open on a list of guest names, most crossed out in an almost angry scrawl. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. There was something about these sheets, the aged paper, the grease stains that almost seemed to glisten under the light, and the way the markings seemed to change when you weren't looking at them directly. Each guest's name was paired with a date, but something struck me as wrong. None of the names had checkout times listed. It was as though no one had ever left this place. The footsteps resumed, pacing back and forth outside the lobby. I froze, unwilling to lift my eyes from the clipboard. My gut twisted with dread as I scanned the names, each one clawing at my brain with familiarity. Then I saw a name that stopped me cold. Edward Dawson. I felt like I'd heard that name somewhere, but I couldn't place it. My hands tightened around the clipboard as I inspected his entry. The date next to his name was from 1972. Next to it was a faint pencil marking, Room 5. The room I hadn't seen any guests enter. The room whose door had seemed to creak open and close on its own. A new sound cut through my thoughts, a dragging, scraping noise, like something heavy being pulled along the floor. It was slow, deliberate, and getting closer. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and the air grew impossibly cold. I turned instinctively toward the door to Room 5. The door I had sworn I wouldn't open again. I don't know why I moved toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I was compelled. But as my trembling hand reached for the door handle, I noticed something I hadn't before. A greasy smudge in the shape of a handprint on the knob. My own reflection stared back at me, distorted and faintly wrong, in the tarnished brass. Behind me, the dragging sound stopped, replaced by a guttural whisper. "Don't." My breath caught, and I spun around, expecting to see someone or something behind me. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the overhead lights and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I gripped the clipboard tighter, the names swimming in my mind. And then the clock struck 3:33. The clock's chime was deafening in the silence. 3 slow, deliberate gongs echoed through the lobby, each one reverberating in my chest like a warning. I stared at the door to Room 5, the clipboard heavy in my hands. My mind screamed at me to back away, to return to the safety of the desk, but my feet betrayed me. Slowly, I stepped forward. The hallway leading to Room 5 felt longer than it had before, as if the building itself was stretching, pulling me towards something I wasn't meant to see. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering in the dim light of the single overhead bulb. The air grew colder with every step, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones and refuses to leave. When I reached the door, my hand hesitated on the knob. The greasy handprint seemed darker now, almost as if it were freshly made. I glanced down at the clipboard again, the name Edward Dawson glaring back at me. My fingers twitched, and I could feel the faint pulse of my heartbeat in my fingertips. The whispers from earlier echoed faintly in my ears, urging me to stop. But I didn't. The door creaked as I turned the knob, the sound splitting the silence like a scream. The room beyond was pitch black, an impenetrable void that swallowed the light from the hallway. I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an ordinary motel room, or at least that's what it seemed at first glance. The bed was neatly made, the blankets tucked in with military precision. A wooden chair sat in the corner, facing the window, which was covered by heavy curtains. On the nightstand, a clock ticked faintly, its hands frozen at 3:33. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, like blood. I took a cautious step inside, the floor creaking beneath my weight. As I scanned the room with the flashlight, I noticed something strange. There were no personal belongings, no suitcase, no clothes, nothing to suggest that anyone had stayed here. The room was eerily pristine, like it had been frozen in time. Then I saw it, a shadow on the far wall, just beyond the reach of the flashlight. It wasn't mine. I was standing perfectly still, and the shadow was moving. Slowly, it crept toward the chair in the corner, taking on a human shape as it moved. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow settled into the chair, its head turning toward me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The shadow didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, cold, heavy, and unrelenting. The door behind me creaked shut, trapping me in the room. My pulse quickened as I backed into the corner, the clipboard still clutched in my hands like a lifeline. The shadow raised its hand and pointed to the nightstand. Slowly, trembling, I turned the flashlight toward it. A note lay there, written in the same faint pencil markings as the rules on the clipboard. I picked it up, the paper crinkling in my hands. The note read, "Do not stay after 3:33. Leave now." Behind me, the shadow stood. My breath came in shallow gasps as the shadow loomed closer. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as though it knew I had nowhere to run. The weight of its gaze pressed down on me, filling the room with an oppressive silence. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to do something, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. The clock on the nightstand ticked once, loud and sharp, and the hands shifted. 3:33. My stomach lurched as a low, guttural hum began to reverberate through the room. It wasn't coming from the shadow or the clock. It seemed to rise from the very walls, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. The note's words burned in my mind. "Do not stay after 3:33. Leave. Now." I had seconds, maybe less. Summoning every ounce of courage, I bolted toward the door, flashlight bouncing wildly in my grasp. The shadow lunged, its elongated arms stretching unnaturally toward me. The air grew impossibly cold, and I could feel its icy touch grazing my back as I stumbled into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the walls. For a moment, I was paralyzed, leaning against the opposite wall and clutching the clipboard to my chest. The hallway was eerily quiet now, the hum from the room extinguished. The only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I didn't wait to see if the shadow would follow. I ran. The corridor seemed endless, each step taking me farther from the lobby instead of closer. Doors blurred past on either side, and the faint whispers from earlier returned, growing louder with every step. They weren't random murmurs anymore. They were calling my name. "Julie." My name echoed through the hall, whispered by voices I didn't recognize. They were pleading, desperate, and their tone sent shivers down my spine. The flashlight began to flicker, the beam weakening as I reached the stairwell leading to the lobby. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as if the walls themselves were crying out. As I descended the stairs, my foot slipped on something slick. I caught myself on the railing and shone the flashlight downward. The steps were wet, smeared with dark, viscous streaks that led downward like a trail. My stomach churned as the smell of decay hit me, thick and nauseating. I had no choice but to continue. The lobby was just ahead, the dim glow of the desk lamp visible at the bottom of the stairs. I gripped the railing tightly and moved as quickly as I could, careful not to lose my footing again. When I reached the bottom, the whispers stopped. The silence was sudden and absolute, as though the motel itself was holding its breath. I turned toward the desk, relief flooding me at the sight of the familiar space. But something was wrong. The lamp's light flickered, casting distorted shadows across the room. The chair behind the desk was turned away, its back facing me. I approached cautiously, the floor creaking beneath me. The clipboard felt heavier in my hands, and I realized my fingers were trembling. Reaching out, I slowly turned the chair around. No one was there. But sitting on the seat was another note, folded neatly and stained with what looked like dried blood. My heart pounded as I picked it up and unfolded it. The message was short, scrawled in the same faint pencil markings. "They're waiting for you in the lobby. Don't turn around." I froze. The air behind me felt heavy, charged with a presence I couldn't see but could feel. My skin prickled, and my legs threatened to give out as the weight of the unseen gaze pressed down on me. My breath hitched, and my grip on the clipboard tightened. I couldn't move. My body screamed for me to run, to throw myself through the nearest door or leap over the desk. But the weight behind me was suffocating. The motel was alive with silence, the kind that thrums in your ears and makes your heart sound deafening. "Don't turn around." The note's warning seemed less like advice and more like a command. Every fiber of my being was straining against it, curiosity mingling with terror. My fingers tightened around the clipboard, the edges digging into my palms. If I turned, would I see them? The voices, the whispers, the shadow that stalked me upstairs? Slowly, I slid the flashlight from my pocket. It was flickering weakly, its light reduced to a jittery beam, but it was better than nothing. I pointed it toward the desk and crouched, trying to make myself as small as possible. The cold air behind me prickled my neck, every fine hair standing on end. Move. Don't think. Just move. With a burst of resolve, I rolled forward, away from the unseen presence. My flashlight beam wobbled wildly as I hit the ground, aiming it toward the lobby's front door. The glass was fogged over, and something moved on the other side, indistinct and shifting. My stomach sank. A sound broke the stillness, a low, guttural creak. It wasn't coming from the lobby, but from the hallway I'd just fled. The noise deepened, resonating like ancient wood bending under pressure. I glanced back toward the stairwell, and my blood ran cold. The shadow was coming. It didn't creep or slink like before. It moved with purpose, pouring down the stairs like liquid smoke. Its shape wasn't defined anymore, tendrils writhing as it spread across the walls and ceiling. The whispers returned, louder now, filling every corner of the lobby. They weren't pleading anymore. They were laughing, mocking. "Julie, why are you running?" The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was sharp and clear, as though someone was speaking right next to my ear. My legs scrambled beneath me, and I bolted toward the glass door, clipboard clutched tightly against my chest. The door seemed impossibly far, the space between us stretching with each step. Behind me, the shadow surged forward, tendrils reaching out like grasping hands. My feet skidded on the slick floor, the echoes of my movements swallowed by the cacophony of voices. One tendril lashed out, grazing my arm. It was cold, impossibly cold, and a searing pain shot through me. I stumbled, nearly falling, and the clipboard slipped from my grasp. It hit the floor with a sharp clack, sliding out of reach. My instinct screamed to grab it, but the shadow was closing in, swallowing the space between us. The whispers became a roar, the words indistinct but filled with malicious glee. Desperate, I threw myself at the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the metal freezing to the touch. The shadow was right behind me now, its presence wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. My breath hitched as the lock clicked open, and I yanked the door wide. For a moment, The cold night air flooded the lobby, sharp and biting. I didn't hesitate. I plunged into the darkness, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I sprinted away from the motel. Behind me, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the ground. I didn't look back. The wind howled against my car as I sped down Route 90, headlights slicing through the endless desert darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, and my breathing was shallow, ragged. The motel was a distant blur in my rearview mirror now, swallowed by the black abyss of the road behind me. But no matter how far I drove, the chill in my chest didn't ease. I couldn't shake the whispers. They had stopped when I left the motel, but now, in the silence of my car, their echo lingered. The words were distorted, impossible to discern, but they carried an eerie familiarity, as if I'd heard them before and would hear them again. My headlights caught something on the road ahead. A figure. My heart slammed into my ribs as I braked hard, the tires skidding on the gravel. The car came to a screeching halt, and I stared out the windshield. There was nothing there, just the barren highway stretching endlessly into the void. I was shaking. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pressed the gas, desperate to put as much distance between me and the motel as possible. The road remained deserted, no sign of other travelers or life, just the oppressive darkness. Then my phone buzzed. It had been dead for hours. I'd watched it power down as I clocked into my shift. My trembling hand reached for it, the screen flickering weakly to life. There was a notification, a new email. It was from the motel. I didn't want to open it, but my thumb hovered over the screen, curiosity clawing at my fear. With a deep breath, I tapped the notification. The message was short. "Julie, you forgot to check the cameras." My stomach dropped. My mind raced back to the night, to the rule I had neglected in my frantic escape. Always check the cameras before leaving your shift. I hadn't. I had left the clipboard, the cameras, everything behind in my desperation to flee. The car's radio crackled to life, static filling the cabin. I hadn't touched it, and the dial remained at 0. A low voice hummed through the interference, speaking words I couldn't comprehend. The screen on the dash flickered, distorted shapes forming and fading. "Julie," the voice hissed, long and drawn out. "Come back." I slammed the radio off, my foot pressing the gas pedal harder. The car roared forward, the desert landscape blurring past me. But no matter how fast I drove, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The rearview mirror reflected only darkness, but I felt something there, just out of sight. And then I saw it, the motel sign. It blinked into existence out of nowhere, the faded neon glowing faintly in the distance. My chest tightened. I'd driven straight for miles, following the highway with no turns. But there it was. The Overlook Motel, standing against the horizon like a sinister beacon. I screamed, slamming the brakes again. The car swerved, tires screeching, and came to a stop. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared at the sign. It was closer now, the flickering letters spelling out the name that had become my nightmare. The whispers returned, louder this time. They filled the car, the air around me, my head. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was no use. They were inside me now, laughing, mocking. "Julie, you're home," they said. And then the car door unlocked.